Hello, friends. How's it going? It is Michael Parker, and welcome back. Today's guest is making his second appearance here on the show to discuss the phenomena that is called the Smiley Face Killer phenomenon. William Ramsey is the host of William Ramsey Investigates podcast. He's also the author of numerous books, including last year's Smiley Face Killers, investigating suspicious water deaths of college-age men in the U.S. and the world. He's also the author of Prophet of Evil, Abomination, Children of the Beast, Global Death Cult. William, welcome back to the show.
Mike, great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I always enjoy our conversations, and you've been a friend of the show. You do great work. I wanted to catch up with you to talk about where we are in 2024 on the Smiley Face Killers. And I've got a couple of news stories that I'm going to bring up. But for the people who didn't see the first show, could you just give us a paragraph or so to catch them up on what this is if somehow they've never heard of this thing?
It's a form of crime. I think it's a new kind of crime that really didn't exist maybe before the 90s. At least it wasn't memorialized, but it got its name from two researchers, early researchers. It was Gilbertson and Gannon. Gilbertson is from Minnesota, Gannon, New York City, New York. And they started noticing young men being found in water after disappearing from bars. And they made a connection between this phenomenon of young men disappearing in bars and then literally disappearing for weeks or months maybe, and then being found in water. And they connected it to the smiley face symbol. And then they wrote a book called Case Studies in Forensic Drownings. And they memorialized this kind of crime as the Smiley Face Killers because of this symbol. And so it's been kind of going on. There was a Patrick McNeil, which is probably one of the early cases. I think that was 1997 out of New York. He was a Fordham University student, and it's continued on all the way up until the present, this is May 2024. It just had really remarkable things just happen this year. I mean, I'm somebody who's been researching it since 2016, and I kind of came at it at a different angle. I wasn't really a true crime researcher, but I was researching kind of Aleister Crowley's influence on the 20th century. And I noticed all these smiley faces. And so then I was like, well, do these smiley faces in culture have something to do with this phenomenon of young men? And I believe there's some kind of overlap there. So that's kind of how I got in. And I made two documentaries. And as you said, I put out a book last year on the subject.
The last time you and I spoke was, I think, 7 or 8 months ago. And I'm going to put a link to that in the description for this so people can go back. And because we covered a lot of the history of this in many cases in the various cities that this is happening in. And one of them is Austin. And I sent you an email a couple of days ago because this just came out, I believe, 2 nights ago on Fox 7 in Austin. They did a segment, I think at the very top of the show. The title of it was Man Speaks Out After Being Drugged While Bar Hopping on 6th Street. The journalist is John Krinjak, so kudos to him for covering this. And basically, I'll just read a couple lines here to get people up what this segment was about. A man is speaking out after he says he was drugged while bar hopping with friends on West 6th Street in downtown Austin. He was found under a bridge with serious injuries. Jeff Jones, 38 of Boston, was visiting Austin for a bachelor party in June 2023. They go out to some clubs later in the evening. He disappears about 1 a.m. They believe that he was speaking with some women. He disappears, and then he is found 3 hours later in a ravine next to Shoal Creek under the 6th Street Bridge. He is still alive. He's somewhat conscious. He currently has no memory of what actually happened to him. They took him to a hospital, the Dell Seton Medical Center. He tested positive for benzodiazepines and the date rape drug Rohypnol. He had really severe injuries, and he's a very lucky man. He has survived this. They did this segment, and I'm very glad to see this getting some coverage on television, especially in Austin. I'm from Texas. I have a lot of friends, some living in Austin. I have never actually heard them mention these murders on social media. I mean, I know that's morbid, but it's just interesting being from Texas, having friends in Austin. I've never heard them mention this.
I think it's because it's a recent phenomenon in Texas. I don't think it was happening until the last 5 or 10 years, but there's been a recent spate of cases. They call it the Rainy Street Ripper, right? Rainy Street is apparently the bar or club street with a lot of bands playing for people who aren't in Austin. So I think it's happened directly correlated to kind of the rise of Austin as a new kind of cosmopolitan place that maybe wasn't over 10 years ago. It was maybe more local, but now it's more national or international. So I think there's something to that. But this guy's case, like, you sent that to me and I was like, wow, this is exactly like other cases I've studied. There's been cases in recent cases Randy Lexvold was actually in that same spot at the 6th Street Bridge. So he wasn't in Lady Bird Lake like the other ones, but he unfortunately passed away. But he had really, really severe injuries that were not consistent with falling off a 10-foot or 12-foot bridge. It's not very high. And he had actually his pelvis broken, like the strongest bone in the human body, which is very strange. And then this GHB is a really common element of these types of cases. So that goes back to Gilbertson and Gannon, where they found higher elevated levels of gamma hydroxybutyrate. I think it's endogenous. So it happens in your brain in lower amounts. But if you give a higher dose, it causes people to black out. But then the body will process it out. So often if you don't test for it, or medical examiners don't test for it, they won't find it. But this guy had it in his system, but it's also similar to another guy. His name was Christian Pugh, who I think was a survivor, who was found near Lady Bird Lake maybe 5 years ago. He was missing for 60 hours. He was passed out. He had no idea, no recollection of what happened to him for the last 2.5 days before he was found with injuries, ended up in the hospital, was very lucky to make it. And probably the same thing. I don't know if they tested him for drugs, but I can't imagine somebody not being drugged and, being asleep for 2.5 days. So, well, this guy's lucky to be alive.
He's very lucky to be alive. He's recovering. And, he was very forthright in this segment. It was, I don't know, like 4-minute long segment, but they covered it. They spoke to him. He described what happened to him as far as he could remember it, because he really had no memory up till waking up in the hospital. So whatever had happened to him from the time he disappeared, and I don't know if someone told him this or he vaguely remembered it, but he thought that he was talking to some women, and then he has no memory until he wakes up in the hospital.
It's incredible. And there's been other cases recently in Austin. I believe, in my opinion, is that Austin, Nashville, another city very similar to Austin in a lot of ways, kind of on the Southern country rotation for musicians. I believe that the authorities in Boston, Nashville, and Austin are covering up their cases. And they had there was a young man named Eli Blau that they covered up. They told the public that initially he had a heart problem and he was a emergency. The young man was 25, Jewish, from Israel. I think he was born in Israel. He was found with only his underwear on. And I know that as a fact. So it's a direct contradiction to the public statements of the police in Austin. And I have a picture of it. I could show it to you. And there's been 2 other cases after Eli Blau. That was in April. And they were all covered up. They wouldn't even release their names. So they're trying to keep the public from panicking. But I do believe that there's a serial killer or killers in Austin for sure. And it may not be the kind of killing that the average person would think, where it's a male involved. It might be females too, like as a group, which is really very scary.
You mentioned Nashville. Yes, Austin and Nashville, both incredibly hip cities at this point in time. I mean, people have been moving to Austin for a long time, and it's always been a music capital. Like, a lot of people from LA are moving to Nashville. Both of these cities, vibrant club scenes, lots of people coming and going. And I mean, that brings me to my next story, which was this terrible case with Riley Strain, which is probably the single most best known of all of these. So a day or two ago, Riley Strain's parents accepted his diploma in tears at the Mizzou graduation ceremony. And Strain was a 22-year-old student there. And he went missing on March 8th after getting kicked out of Luke's 32 Bridge in downtown Nashville. He was on a trip with his friends, and I'm going to have you tell us more about that. But some additional news is that his family has just hired a lawyer. The toxicology report is about to come out. I don't know when it's going to come out. I'm guessing that maybe they have already seen it. I don't know, but they have now hired a legal team.
Yeah, very interesting updates. Riley Strain was a big guy, 6'7", kind of a skinny guy, fits the profile of the victims. It was Luke Bryan. Apparently, I'm not a huge country fan, but he is a very accomplished country music singer. And apparently, they kind of have themed bars now in Nashville. So Kid Rock, Luke Bryan, some of these other people would sponsor these bars. Luke Bryan's is a big bar. It has 3 bars. It's like a big setup. Riley Strain came from the University of Missouri, just like you said, Springfield, Missouri is my belief. Came into Nashville with his frat brothers, was pre-drinking or pre-gaming. He had been in a frat. He was a senior, so it wasn't his first time he had tasted beer or alcohol. He was relatively experienced. Was partying, went into Luke Bryan's at 9:30, and by 10 he was gone and had disappeared. So he had been either kicked out, and somebody tagged him to say that he was a problem and left. But there's very good video. And like you said, this is probably one of the most well-known SFK or smiley face killing type cases that's been publicized. It's remarkable for me as somebody who's kind of been studying these things without a lot of public view to see this all over the media, national media, a lot of videos, News Nation, all over local media, and even international. It made it to the UK. We're really following his case. And he fit all the profiles. He was found in the water on March 22nd, 2 weeks, Friday morning. And the police captain came out, his name was Blake, and said he just popped up. He had a 4-minute press conference, and just wrapped it up and said he just popped up. He found him, a local found him. That was it. Well, later things were divulged. The medical examiner had told somebody in another conversation that there was air in Riley's lungs.
Not water.
So if there's air in his lungs, how does he drown, right? So this notion that he supposedly drowned is contradicted by the early medical examiner's statement. His report hasn't come out yet. The autopsy, usually takes 6 weeks. So it should be by the end of the month. He also didn't divulge that Riley was missing his boots, his pants, and his belt. Like, he was only seen with a shirt. I don't even think he had his underwear on, and no wallet and no phone. So all this stuff is missing. So if he accidentally fell into the water, why would he take off all his clothes and throw his phone, which has never been found to date? His phone hasn't been found. There's a very suspicious thing that happened in between his disappearance and the discovery of his body, which his bank card was found by 3 random people searching by the riverbed while he was last seen, which is very strange that the police couldn't find it, or search teams.
How long after he was found did they find the bank card? Was it a matter of days? Was it a week?
It was about a week after he disappeared. So it was before his body was found. And there was never any divulging to the public about the state of his body. They just said they found his body. One of the more important things about these cases is oftentimes when the body is found, it doesn't correlate with when the person disappeared, right? So oftentimes they've only been in 2 or 3 days of decomposition. So that's never divulged to the public. And that's something that's important, because the family, like you said, is hired a lawyer. They also hired an independent autopsy, because there's a history of these cases, because I've studied these a lot. I mean, it's not anything to be really proud about, but I've studied a lot, and these medical examiners have bungled it, and the authorities have provided false information to the public for, I think, to cover up for political reasons and to kind of not panic the public in those cities that something might be going on.
When you said that Riley Strain just popped up, because I remembered, and I should have brought this up earlier, on the Jeff Jones case, there was an anonymous call that led people to find Jeff Jones, who's still alive, but when they found Riley Strain, was there a call involved, or did someone come across him?
No, it's a good question. It happened very early in the morning, 7:30 a.m., and he was found 8 miles downstream, which he should have been farther down, actually, based upon the speed of the Cumberland River. If he had just flown from where he was last seen, if he had floated. But he was found near an industrial area, an international industrial chemical company. One of the employees found him lodged up against a barge or something like that. And so that was the call that came in, and they said, I found it. So the public found his body. It's very strange. Like, the police didn't find it. They brought out teams of divers, like very sophisticated divers, not like, weekend Joes or something, guys who knew how to do underground water searches. They couldn't find his body. So it is interesting that the public found it. So the whole case is suspicious from beginning to end, to when he was found and to the present, really, because they haven't divulged a lot of information. So the Riley Strain case is really something. There's just weird things about it the whole time. There's strange people popping up. You talk about this random call with this John guy in Austin. There were people around with smiley face phone cases and a lot of kind of speculation. And just weird that a woman was the one who reported Riley Strain to be kicked out. He got kicked out and disappeared in a half an hour. Like, it's so strange. And there's people there were like homeless people by the river's edge that said that he was talking to somebody on the phone. So it sounded to me like he was being led out away from the bar by somebody through social media or through a Facebook app or something like FaceTime, and then just disappeared and no phone. Like, the whole thing fits the Smiley Face Killers. That's why I knew kind of after a week after he wasn't found that he probably was going to be found in water, just like all the other victims. Like, I've studied over 300 cases. So it's just another one added to the list. Yeah.
I was going to mention that when the last time you were on, we talked about the fact that I think in your book, you talk about 300 cases. In this Riley Strain case, I believe that the bar, they say, well, he was only served one drink and he was also served some water before he was kicked out. But was there ever any closed camera or video from inside the bar that was ever released as to what was going on?
It's not to the public, for public purview. One of the interesting things about this case, too, is because of kind of social media interest, there were a lot of different researchers. A lot of people sent me stuff that I just was like amazed. Like, you guys are on top of this. They knew names and places and video. So there's a video of a police officer talking to Riley just before he disappeared. There's video camera of kind of, I think it's a federal building, watching where he should have been, watching people in the shadows with phones running around. Like, I don't know if that was ever investigated, but Luke Bryan's bar put something out where they did a public announcement, formal public announcement, saying we only served him one drink. And then we asked him to leave because he was drunk, which is very strange to only have one drink and then leave. And then they never divulged the video, which could answer all the questions because you could see who he was in contact with at that bar and maybe see who slipped him a Mickey. When he disappeared on March 8th, then people started posting all over social media. And it's just like this guy in Austin. People are saying, that reminds me of my night in Nashville where I, was drinking and I don't remember anything, so it seems like there's a common current of druggings taking place in Nashville as well. It's provable in Austin that people are getting drugged all the time on Rainy and all these other places at night. Riley Strain's case is a little different because it happens earlier. Usually it's like the bars close or something like that, or it's after midnight. But his is odd because it happened in a very busy time of the night. It still was before 10. So it's almost like he got lured away from the CCTV video. And I've had these conversations, Igor Sarsky, other people, about how these are sophisticated. They're thought out crimes, because that's why there's no video of these things happening, or they're not divulged. And I think Riley Strain is that he was lured to a place where he could be abducted, in my opinion. Yeah.
And so you're saying that the bar, they've never released the videos that they had inside the club that night?
No, I would have seen it. No, they have not. They should. And it's so strange. There's so many other cases that the video suspiciously is super grainy or just didn't work. Like, one of the first cases that I studied was in 2016, Joey LaBute out of Columbus, Ohio, and the same thing. Like, they had a video camera that didn't work. Like, you could see the video camera, but it was so opaque, you couldn't figure out anything that was going on. So why do you even have a video camera? And so, it makes you suspicious of the people who worked at these bars and the owners of these bars, actually. So
I think it's very suspicious. And we've always told women to be careful, please watch your drink. But now, it's men and women, which brings me, I guess, to my next question, which is, originally when we talked about this, a lot of these men were skewing young, late teens to mid 20s, and mostly Caucasian. But now it seems like there's people of color and people in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah, no, it's odd. It's very different. They're still kind of the core kind of group, but like you said, like in other cities, a lot of people from India or South Asia are popping up. There were 3 cases back to back in Vancouver and in Toronto as well. Very strange kind of victim pool. And in Chicago, a lot of African Americans, which is really odd. It's come to the attention of some civil rights leaders. The guy's
Good.
name is Crum or Crump, who's like a known kind of civil rights lawyer
Hmm.
for African Americans. He popped into one of the cases. So you're right, it is different. And it's a very odd turn that is happening. A lot more Latinos and African Americans now. But I think Riley Strain kind of fit the profile of
Hmm.
the thing. And I like one of the things you can kind of surmise is that the college age kids aren't like high school where they're being monitored, right? So they get out and they may not be as suspicious or, you know, be as careful of themselves as they should be. And so I think that that's why that pool, that's why it's college age men, not high school men, because they're at home, right? So mom and
Hmm.
dad or mom or somebody's like, where are you? When are you coming home? Right. But it's not like that for these guys. So I think that that is kind of like a group that the predators predate upon, almost like it's the Serengeti or something like that. And a
Well,
lot of these serial killers are predators. They're predatory,
for sure.
you know, just like Jeffrey Dahmer or something, John Wayne Gacy.
Another thing that we talked about the last time, which still strikes me, is that many cases, most of these men are highly educated. Many of them are engineers or software developers. I mean, there were some people in Austin, I think, who even had connections to like Eco Health Alliance, which is very weird.
Jason John was his name. Yeah, Jason John. He was an Indian guy or a South Asian. I don't know what, from India or that area. Yeah, Jason John was.
You sent me some documents because I wanted to move on to what's going on this year. I had no idea. You've been covering this for 8, 9, 7, whatever it is, and there's many of you guys doing great citizen journalism, which the cops and the FBI seem to not be doing. So I give kudos to the crowd.
It's like a network. It's almost like a crowd thing because people like I miss stuff and people send. You see this? So there's definitely like a very dedicated group out. Jim Smith and a lot of other people who send cases and are really on point from different parts of the internet, Facebook groups. I forgot this other website. So it's not just me. I cannot take credit for all of it.
No, I wanted to give credit to Jim Smith. I'm looking here for his because I follow him, and it is Smiley Face Cult. Drowning Victims is what he is on X/Twitter, and also to Lori Faber. She's Lori Faber 898. I follow her. Her brother.
That's Randy Lexvold's sister. I don't know if you know.
Yes. That. Yeah. Oh, yes. And so to all of these people and the family members who are doing this continued work that law enforcement should be doing, I tip my hat. And I have great respect for all of you. You sent me some documents, and there was one that was called a lunar cycle. Are you saying that some of this now is coordinated with phases of the moon? Which, if that's the case, then we've definitely got something very weird and occult themed. Is that what you mean?
I think it's because of the occulted moon of the sun, right? So the eclipse. So I think that's what it actually picked up during the eclipse. Some of those people disappeared during the eclipse, and some of them like right around that time. So I think that's the lunar cycle. I've always tried to correlate these cases to the moon or something. I haven't done it successfully, and other people have tried to, but I think it's because of the eclipse. When was that? April 8th? Is that right?
I believe that was the date. I can't remember.
There, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely in April.
Yeah. So I think that's it. But yeah, so there was a lot of cases all over the world. So I think maybe something like if you're into the occult or something, maybe that's gives you more power if you commit these crimes. But there was like I sent you the brutal kill cycle document of 2024, 20 cases, New York, Tyler, Texas, Harley Moore is still missing. I was actually in Texas last month and I ran into, this is how close it was I ran into somebody who knew his family just on a random kind of thing. So it was real. I'm like, I know these cases. I know him. You should check the water. You should check the water, around where he disappeared. Same thing. Some young guy, skinny, disappeared late at bar, 2 a.m., got out of the bar, disappeared. His hasn't been found yet. But there's all kinds of Abdul Muhammad, Cleveland, Chicago, Jeffrey Winton, Minnesota, Winston DePaul, Peter Martin, Duluth, Minnesota, Wyatt Rowland, Riley Strain. There was another one that fell in the water too around Riley Strain. It was Jonathan Sloan. Charlie Saywell, UK. Caleb Harris, I don't think has been found in Corpus Christi.
I've got that document in front of me, and I tried to write notes about so many of these, and a couple of things came to my mind while I was reading this and going through the other materials that you sent me. And one of the first things I was wondering is how many of these people, when they were recovered, if they were recovered, that toxicology reports were run upon, and how many of them may have had a smiley face symbol in the vicinity or no.
I don't know. Like the police have kind of clamped down a lot of that information. So I don't know. I wish I did. They didn't even tell there were 2 bodies in Boston found. They didn't even say their names. I mean, there were 2 in Philadelphia, which are really like African-American guys, both found in water. There's 2 in Austin. I don't know their names yet. They just said they were bodies. So
the one that happened in Philadelphia, I can't say, Asar Scott and Kadir Diaz, they were 2 of 3 guys. And I believe they said, because one guy actually got away, he said that someone was chasing them in a car, and I guess they had a car wreck. And then the 2 young men who were found dead went one direction and he went the other direction. And so he got home safely.
Yeah, and they disappeared. It was the same kind of story. They disappeared, and then all of a sudden they were found in a local river. So really, just incredible stuff. Like just a lot of deaths. And that doesn't even bring into account this whole thing that happened in the UK that we can talk about at some point, which is the conviction of a transgender, transsexual by the name, or who took the name, Scarlett Blake, which fit all the parameters to a T of a smiley face killing modus operandi.
Okay,
it was off the chart.
So explain that, because I don't know this story.
Okay, so in 2021 in Oxford, right, the famous kind of college town or university town in the UK, I think it's in between Bath and London, a young man by the name of Jorge Carreño, who was originally from Spain, was found in kind of a pond, and he was passed away. And there was a very mysterious, like he was just found deceased, and they assumed he either committed suicide or something happened, but there was no knowledge of him. Well, 2 years later, there is a transsexual from whose name is Ashlyn. These are all fake names. A lot of these transgender people have fake names. But in Austin, called the police in the UK and said, you should look into this person, Scarlett Blake. He's born in China or Hong Kong or something, so he's Asian. He's formerly a man who's now supposedly a woman. You should look into this guy because he told me he's responsible for the death of Jorge Carreño, which the police and the public had thought was some kind of mysterious accidental drowning, much like the rest of these cases, right? Everybody thinks they're mysterious, just like Riley Strain. And so the police looked into him, and there was some type of admission or enough evidence to arrest him for the death of Jorge Carreño. He was just convicted, I think, 2 months ago. And the whole story of him was that he was kind of like this killer who was from Canada. His name was, has another fake name. Luca Magnotta is what he went by, who actually made a snuff film. And that's what Scarlett Blake did to a cat. He tortured and really brutalized a cat. And on video said, I want to do this to a person. And he had some kind of strange international relation with this person, Ashland, in Austin, right? This other so they were part of some kind of transsexual network. And he visited them. They were into all kinds of BDSM. That's another thing that I've surmised about these guys, is they're into really hardcore kind of sexual behavior. They were like choking each other out was kind of their thing. So what Blake did is went out late at night and hunted for a random victim. So he was out in these, they saw him on CCTV. And so he was out and they could follow it because they went back to 2021 and looked at the CCTV. They saw this man who now is supposedly a woman, who's like a transsexual, literally has boobs and has gone through the puberty blockers and stuff like that, but still has male genitals. They followed him around Oxford until he found this guy who'd been partying with his coworkers, Jorge Carreño. They don't know the details of what happened, but they could see them walking off into a non-CCTV area, just like Riley Strange. Strange, huh? Or a lot of these other cases, they like disappear into this thing. So they go into this kind of creek area. They're there for a half an hour, and then Jorge Carreño's phone stops working because it goes into the water. And so they were there for a half an hour doing God knows what. And that was it. And so then in the local newspapers, young man drowns in the thing. This guy, Scarlett Blake, then, according to information derived from this guy, Ashland from Austin, went back to the crime scene like many other serial killers. So he was back to the scene of where Jorge died and whatever was like doing it. And then he told Ashland sometime later before his arrest that I committed the perfect crime. And that's what these SFK type of killings are kind of this type of environment. So this guy literally proved or confirmed the speculation or thesis that this is what's happening. So it's very strange because Scarlett Blake had traveled to the US and been in Austin. So they didn't follow up like a lot of these other kind of people who are busted for these types of death. They don't get followed up and ask them if they've done it before or to somebody else, right? So it's very strange. So these deaths start happening in Austin. Who's there? Scarlett Blake is around there with his boyfriend, his transsexual boyfriend, who's online right now. Ashland, I wish I could remember his fake name. And all of the regalia is very similar to stuff I studied in my book, Global Death Cult. So they're into Nazi memorabilia. They dress up like O9A members, all in black. His boyfriend had some kind of weird Baphomet insignia. Like, I mean, you can see, I think I sent you some of those PDFs or whatever. I don't know if you pull them up, but like it gets very dark and very strange. But that, I think, confirms that something like that is happening with a lot of these other cases. And there's this guy, Scarlett Blake, his real name, they don't even know. It's so strange. The court never really divulged what his given name was, but they called him Fang Shi Wang, which is supposedly a fake name. But they think his real name is Cheng. And he comes from a wealthy family. Both of his parents were professors at Oxford. So he's mentally kind of sophisticated, but he also went through the Tavistock Institute for sexual reassignment, which they've closed down now. So he's one of the early people that they transitioned, right?
How old is this person?
Pardon me? Yeah, I think he's 25 or 27, mid-20s. Okay. And I speculated that it's almost like you interviewed Dave McGowan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like Programmed to Kill, I call it Transition to Kill. Was there something that happened in this medical procedure that made him angry? Because I know that those kind of those puberty drugs or whatever, or giving estrogen to men changes your personality. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So maybe that drove him to what he did. I mean, it's pure speculation. But yeah, that's an amazing case because that's actually one of the real cases where somebody got caught for committing this type of crime.
Well, one thing that goes through my mind when I'm reading all these, and like I say, I try to write notes to all of them, but in many cases, these are young men. So you have to think, because like one of these guys is a cadet, a Marine cadet, I believe. My point is that many of these young men, you would think, even if you can't swim, you're probably physically capable. So like if you fall into a pool of water while you're intoxicated, you would think that you might still have some of the wherewithal to get out of this body of water. So that's just another thing that's really remarkable to me, that clearly this is some form of predation. And I also, and I asked you this the last time, but it seems like there's several different things going on here. There is the SFK phenomena that is associated with whatever occult or fetish thing is happening. Then there are the people who may be creating these crimes to make it look like that. And then there's the people who are perhaps now falling in line in a copycat version of it.
Right. It's really scary. Like what's going on online? How has this got expanded? How has this template or MO been spread around? Like that's really what's very scary. And I think it correlates with the internet, right? And travel, international travel. I do believe there's something like that. And they're communicating. And I would think that if I was a law enforcement or international Interpol or FBI trying to figure out what these guys are doing, where they are, I would study Scarlett Blake. What is he doing? What are his fake names? What's he doing? Is he stalking his victims' parents? Because some of that stuff happens. So it's really, I think that the authorities are dropping the ball because there's 300 dead men. Maybe they could figure out some of these other cases or some of this other stuff. So,
well, I was listening to one of your interviews with Jim Smith, and you guys were talking about, why does law enforcement or FBI intelligence agencies, why do they seem so reticent to follow up on this and call it what it is? And I think you guys make very good points is, yes, they're trying not to scare everybody, but really that's not a good enough reason, man. And then a lot of these are happening in college towns or burgeoning tech cities where now you've got a lot of people moving in with a lot of money. So I would implore those in law enforcement and the FBI, please, for the love of God, step it up, man, and help us out because a lot of young people are dying, and there's just no way that many able-bodied young men are going to fall over while urinating in a lake. And
right. Well, how do they make it there? Like supposedly,
good point.
They're so drunk they fall in, but they can get to the water and go to take a leak. It's some of these like true crime analysts are a total joke because that's what they really think. Like there's people on Riley Strain who said, I think we can just cough this up. They just closed the case in their own mind, which is we can just cough this up to a young man really wanting to go take a leak. Where's his phone? Where's his pants? Where's his boots? He had freaking cowboy boots on. Yeah, it takes you have to take effort usually to get in and out of cowboy boots. So it's just totally, where's his pants? It's so crazy. So I think the whole kind of urination, and the other thing is that who saw him do it? Who saw all these guys go into the water? Every case that I've ever studied, Mike, nobody sees them go in the water. Not one. So once I find out somebody said Joe was out at one, we were hanging out, he took off his shirt and jumped in the water, those cases are gone. All the cases that I've studied, no one has seen them go in the water, including Riley Strain.
William, when I first started looking into this as a result of reading your book and talking to you, the first thing that went off in my mind was the missing 411 cases that David Politis had done. And, immediately a lot of law enforcement and FBI guys said, you know what? And in this particular case for the audience, if you don't know about this, David Politis did some books and documentaries on mysterious disappearances of people in national parks. And the similarity to me was that in many cases, these people would go missing suddenly. There would be searches for them. They would not be found. And then later they would be found in a place that was previously searched in or near water. In some cases, they would find the clothes neatly folded. But my point is that they had law enforcement seem to kind of have the same response to the missing 411 that they're having officially to the Smiley Face Killer phenomena murders. They're just rejecting it, saying, no, these are being loosely tied together by, the internet sleuths who are trying to make something out of it.
I wish they could prove me wrong. I mean, the thing is, I would like to see them. Where is the proof that these are accidental? There's no, especially if the medical examiner says that Riley Strain had air in his water, he didn't. You know what they chalked it up to is a dry drowning. That this 22-year-old healthy guy whose parents said was a good swimmer. I could swim across the Cumberland and back at my age, 55. It's a slow-moving river. It's not some kind of treacherous thing like people envision, like it's the Colorado River or something like that. It's a slow river that you have to wade out to even get into 6 feet of water, So it's really ridiculous and they ascribed his death to supposedly choking on air after he fell in and choking. So they have the speculation is incredible. They think he actually was urinating and then choked on his air and died. But nobody sees it. That's the whole thing. That's really what it comes down to. So the FBI, they can look at my book. FBI discounted it. Actually, it's the second chapter of my new book because they're saying it's just speculation. But the phenomenon persists. And it's more than what people were talking about in 2010. They used to say it was 40 cases. We're way past that. It's a slaughter, man. Global slaughter. It's more than hundreds of cases.
Another thing that occurred to me that's really frightening about this is most urban areas have a body of water somewhere.
That's why
You
they
know,
started, right? Because
right.
that's where the cities are, where water is. You can survive.
And so that's really scary. And I would ask all people who are going out at night, we've always had to be vigilant, but now we have to be even more vigilant. And especially if you're adjacent to water. And then in some cases, maybe these are crimes of opportunity, but in many cases, it seems like these people have been chosen. And I believe that Lori Faber said that her brother in Austin, someone had put out a GoFundMe in his name a couple of days before he went missing. So clearly, someone had foreknowledge of this. And in another case, I believe it was in Corpus Christi, this young man, Caleb Harris, he was going to go walk his dog. I believe that he had also put the word out either on Reddit or something else that, maybe he was looking to meet up. So
Yeah.
there's information on the internet where people are coordinating these things and in some cases planning this ahead of time.
Right. I totally think the selection for some of these cases is real. Whatever's happening, some of these guys might be on the down low. Some of them are clearly homosexuals, right? Like there's a strong proportion of these guys who are homosexuals. So they're on Grindr or something like that. So maybe some like person is targeting, like, this is my target person. I'm going to try to trick him. And I've heard of stories on Grindr where a lot of these guys are using fake names, fake personas, and things like that. So people don't know their real name. So I think the selection is real. I think that Joey LaBute was probably selected, as was Dakota James. There was like a pre-trial of Dakota James getting drugged and calling his friend to have him picked up, and so then 5 weeks later he disappears, and then 40 days later he's found in the Ohio River. So I think that there's some very dark actors out there, very cold-blooded. And I mean, one of the cases that I looked is kind of like a test case, or offender typology is what I call it, like somebody who would do a smiley face type killing, is a case out of East London. His name was Stephen Port. And that's what he was doing. He was on all kinds of gay apps. He would target the guys. He would meet them late at night, bring him back, and drug them with GHB. And then, like the ones that we know that he killed, he left in a church, like a cemetery. And then were fake notes, so he like covered it up. He was trying, the police got duped. They actually had a huge inquest about Stephen Port, about how the police got buffooned. And you can watch stories. I've done interviews with people who've done books about him. But it is a remarkable case, and I think it overlaps with the kind of smiley face killing MO.
Last night, I was also kind of free associating, and I was thinking about all of this again. And I know that in one of your previous interviews, you and Jim had talked about you wish that this had a different name besides Smiley Face Killers, and I understand that. And I think it's another reason that some people use the very name to make light of its existence as a phenomena. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to go down a rabbit hole for a minute. And I was looking at the symbol of the smiley face, and bear with me just for a second. And I was thinking, okay, I remember smiley faces predominantly in particular iconography. Apparently, the guy who invented the smiley face, this was like in the early 60s, and he did it for an insurance company that had changed hands. And he got paid like, I don't know, $400 in today's currency to just create this symbol. And it began to take off. And in the hippie culture and the 70s, it came to prominence, and it was a very popular symbol. And then I was thinking in the 80s, it was on the cover of The Watchmen, which was a comic book that was created by this guy, Alan Moore. And then we fast forward into the 90s, and well, also in the 80s, it became a symbol also for kind of acid house and electronic music and, doing drugs. And
Nirvana uses it.
Yeah, and then we go into
Fight
the 90s
Club, yeah.
in the grunge scene, the Fight Club. And I can't help but feel that I was trying to think, I said, well, if we could figure out why they use this symbol, then maybe we could know a little bit more about them. But I can't help but feel that part of the symbol of the smiley face is the just repugnant hubris of these people who are doing this, laughing at us.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's smiling through tragedy. I think that's what it is. And I think that that's kind of a group tag. Like if you were in you know, a mob group or some kind of thing, you just put the smiley face up. So you're signaling to other people. Like some people just think differently. So I think that that's a very small minority, but I think that that may be their kind of insignia or something. And I think that's why it got the name from Gilbert and Gannon, because they made some kind of correlation between these groups online. And they say they have multiple other symbols, but it's really kind of it's because of their work that we end up with this SFK thing. So the murders are still the deaths are still happening outside of whether there's a smiley face there or not. Right. They found one close to where Seamus Gray was found in North Chicago. That was last year or 2 years ago. So they're still kind of popping up here and there. They're not, I don't know if they're associated with every case. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what another way would call it, like water bar to water deaths, because they all seem to be at a bar at some place and then disappear in found water.
Well, another thing that we all need to take very seriously is that when we go out, especially, look, we talked about in the previous show, one guy was leaving an electronic music concert. So a lot of these people that leave these functions, they're music related. And a lot of times it's music related where, there's party drugs in the mix. So we all have to be very, very careful.
Right. I totally agree. I mean, it's getting dangerous. Like, I think that this spate of drugging there's happening here in LA. There's a lot of people getting drugged downtown. So I think that that's a much more common thing. And in Austin, they've caught people getting drugged and robbed. In New York City, they busted a gang who would drug rich homosexuals and then go to their apartment and just loot them. And some of those guys who got drugged died, like they got overdosed. I don't know whether by intent or negligently, but
just
it does happen.
A couple of years ago, there was a woman and her daughter who was busted and prosecuted in Austin for doing this very thing. And it is kind of an old trick. You
slip a Mickey, right? That goes way back.
You lure them into a room and then you drug them and you take everything. And, it's horrible. And unfortunately, in some ways, it makes you think, well, I hope that the cops don't use this as an easy way to explain something. Oh, well, it was that old trick, when something it's even darker and weirder than that.
Yeah, look at Jeffrey Dahmer as an exemplar. Like, he was into drugging his victims. That's what he would do. Whether he was out, I think he got kicked out of one bathhouse in Milwaukee because they caught him drugging people, for whatever reason. So that was just his thing. And then sometimes they'd overdose or then he'd kill them or whatever. But he was a repeat drugger, much like Stephen Port. His drug of choice was GHB. So I think it's more common than people know. So you got to really watch out these days.
Well, I take my hat off to people like you and Jim and Lori and the others and everyone out there who's kind of crowd searching. What's the word? I'm like crowdsourcing all of this information.
Yeah.
Because these people are all doing the work that apparently is not getting done on the other side of the badge.
I would agree with that. I think it's a shame. And yeah, I mean, I think we talked last time. It may go all the way. Yeah, it's like the Tafari Campbell with Obama. Like, it may go much higher. It may be like an elite thing. It may be these guys get so bored that an older, maybe they're like Stephen Port kind of out-aged himself from the kind of maybe more desirable gay strata because he was in his 40s and he had to wear like a toupee. So maybe it's an older thing where they really want this kind of male ideal. And Chris Knowles of Secrets Unspeaks did a show. I have to watch it, but he basically thought or surmised that this may be some kind of like old man who liked this Antinous ideal, which is Hadrian was one of the Roman emperors, I think, from 150. He was involved in the Bar Kokhba revolt, overthrowing that, and Hadrian's Wall, if you remember. But he had this ideal male that he had. His name was Antinous, which is now kind of passes through the homosexual, groups or whatever. So that's kind of Antinous in them, may be like Marilyn Monroe for heterosexuals or something. And it was used in this whole Pizzagate thing. This guy, what was his name? What was the pizza guy's name? Anyway, his symbol was in there too. So Knowles is saying that maybe this is kind of an Antinous cult, or this is some kind of desirable thing that they're looking for these men. And Antinous, by the way, then drowned, of all places, in the Nile. So like there's a drowning component to this kind of male ideal. So it's almost like Antinous was sealed in death as the eternal gay ideal or something like that.
William, what is next for you?
Just been working, I'm at my 1200th episode on my podcast, so people can look at that. Yeah, I've done a lot of shows on this. Like you mentioned, Jim Smith's interviews. I did a lot of stuff on Riley Strain, this guy, Scarlett Blake. And I've just been kind of working. I'm halfway through re-editing the book that I put out last year. So I'm going to have a second edition because there was so much new information that came out. But hopefully I'll have some interesting things on the horizon we can talk about.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, the book is The Smiley Face Killers, Investigating Suspicious Water Deaths of College-Aged Men in the U.S. and the World. I read it about 7 or 8 months ago when you came on the first time. And when you sent me this list of all the new mysterious disappearances and victims, it breaks my heart. And really, I'd like to dedicate this episode to the investigators and the families. Your family members are not forgotten by us. And if this can help in any way to continue the investigations into what's going on here, I hope that it does. William, thank you so much for coming back on again.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me. Good to talk with you again.
You guys, if you enjoy what we're doing here, man, I would love it if you could press the like button, give me subscribe to the show. I'm doing this for free, at least for right now, and just trying to get the information out there on the stories that I think are important and that interest me. And I appreciate everybody who listens, and it means the world to me when people comment to me or tell me they listen to the show. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, keep your heart and your mind open. Peace.